The reception clock struck 9 sharp when Hannah walked into the imposing building, its glass walls reflecting the entire city. The air conditioning blew cold, contrasting with the stifling heat outside. The sound of heels echoed on the marble floor, mingled with the clatter of keyboards and the murmur of anxious voices. It was the day of the interview for a high-ranking position, an opportunity that could change destinies. She walked with firm, yet simple steps. Her dress was modest, navy blue, well-ironed, but visibly worn over time. Her hair tied back in a low braid, no adornments. There was something unassuming about her presence, but also something magnetic, as if within her there was a spark difficult to ignore. As she approached the registration desk, Hannah felt the eyes on her. She also felt the weight of the luxurious environment, with its sparkling lights and modern furniture, everything exuding power and prestige. But she took a deep breath, remembering her mother's words that morning. "It doesn't matter how they see you. What matters is who you are." It was at that moment that Victoria entered. She wore an impeccable tailored suit, shining high heels, and a striking perfume that filled the air. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her confident smile, and the latest generation cell phone in her hands. She seemed to command the entire room with her arrogant presence. She approached the desk, looked Hannah up and down, and let out a muffled laugh, as if she had already declared the outcome of that dispute. "Are you here for the position too?" Victoria asked, her voice laced with irony. "Yes, I am," Hannah replied, calmly. "Interesting." Victoria tilted her head. "They're really interviewing all kinds of people." Hannah didn't answer. She just held her bag tightly and waited her turn. The receptionist asked both to sign the attendance sheet and wait. The seats were side by side. The silence between them seemed heavy, broken only by Victoria's frantic phone typing and Hannah's deep breaths, trying to stay focused. That was when the HR manager appeared, Mr. Richard Collins. A tall man, light gray suit, rectangular glasses, and a calculating gaze. He approached the two candidates, consulting the papers in his hands. His eyes first swept over Victoria, landing approvingly on her confident posture. Then, they slid to Hannah. And, unable to hide it, he gave a small smile of disbelief. "I see we have very distinct profiles today," said Collins, adjusting his glasses. "I hope you're all prepared." Hannah only nodded. Victoria smiled, as if she had already secured approval. As they waited to be called, the atmosphere grew denser. The sound of the elevator going up and down, the distant clinking of coffee cups carried by interns, the clicking of heels on the floor, all of it became the soundtrack of tension. Hannah observed every detail, every hurried face, every curious glance. The simplicity of her clothing stood out, but within her there was a flame of determination that no one there could measure yet. Finally, an assistant called out, "Ladies, please follow me." Hannah's heart beat faster. Victoria seemed inflated with superiority. They walked side by side into the room for the first stage. The corridor was long, lit by white panels reflecting their images in the glass. Hannah felt the cold of the floor through her modest shoes and, for a moment, her stomach tightened. But then she lifted her head. She knew this was only the beginning. And as they pushed open the heavy door to the first test, a strong feeling filled her, that no matter how many laughs or disdainful looks she had to face, the truth would one day come to light. That interview would be much more than a competition for a position. It would be the stage where destiny would reveal who Hannah really was. Hannah was not the kind of person who drew attention at first sight. She grew up in a small house on the outskirts of the city, where the furniture was simple, but the kitchen table was always covered with books. Her mother, Helena, believed education was the greatest legacy she could leave her daughter. There was no material wealth, but there was discipline, love, and constant encouragement never to give up on dreams. From a very young age, Hannah displayed unusual curiosity. While other children played in the streets, she would spend hours leafing through used books her mother bought at flea markets. She didn't understand all the words, but her eyes sparkled as she imagined what might be hidden in each page. It was in that modest, quiet space that her love for languages was born. At the age of 8, Hannah discovered an old radio at a neighbor's house. Amid static and noise, she managed to tune into foreign stations. She was fascinated by the different sounds she didn't understand, but that felt like music to her ears. Determined to learn, she began imitating the voices, repeating words until she had memorized the sounds. Helena would laugh, but deep down, she was proud she saw in her daughter a flame the world didn't yet recognize. "Mom, one day I'll understand all these words," Hannah would say, pointing to the radio. "And you will, my daughter. Because anyone with the will can learn anything they want," Helena would reply, stroking her hair. By the age of 10, Hannah was already reading short passages in English. On her own, she would write down every word in worn notebooks, translating however she could. Later, she began frequenting the public library, where she discovered old grammar books in French and German. She would spend entire afternoons there, while other teenagers busied themselves with social media or parties. Her life wasn't easy. Many times, she helped her mother clean houses to supplement their income. Her fingers would become red from scrubbing, but her mind was always occupied with new phrases she had read in secret between chores. Every coin saved was used to buy secondhand books, which she kept like treasures. Over time, Hannah gained fluency in several languages. There were no certificates or diplomas, only scribbled notebooks, hours of dedication, and a passion too great for words. Helena moved, watched her daughter transform into an extraordinary young woman, even though she never flaunted her talent. Still, Hannah knew well what it meant to be underestimated. At school, she was called weird for preferring books to idle chatter. She was often mocked for her simple way of dressing, but she never retaliated. She knew that one day she would have the chance to show who she really was. When the opportunity for a position at one of the city's largest companies arose, Helena was the first to encourage her. "This could be your chance, my daughter. Don't be afraid to try." "But they'll laugh at me, Mom. I don't have the diplomas they ask for. Papers don't define what you know. Show them what's inside you, and one day, someone will see." Those words echoed in Hannah's mind as she walked through the company's hallways. Her heart carried not only the hope of a better future, but also the weight of the silent battles that had brought her there. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She also knew she would face looks of disdain, like the one she had already felt in the reception area. But she also knew the determination that had sustained her for years would not abandon her at that crucial moment. As she sat down for the first stage, her eyes scanned the room full of candidates. Many had elegant briefcases, expensive clothes, looks of superiority. Hannah had none of that. She only had her story, her strength, and her faith in the knowledge she had cultivated, like someone watering a flower in barren soil. And though no one in that room could imagine it, it was precisely that invisible baggage that made her unique. Because Hannah did not carry memorized answers. She carried the sound of foreign voices that echoed from the radio, the smell of the old library, the rough touch of her mother's hands after a long day of work. She carried every hidden tear, every sleepless night studying. All of that shaped the woman who, on that day, was ready to prove to the world that even the simplest can hold greatness no one imagines. Victoria had always known how to draw attention. Since childhood, she had been raised among privileges, private schools, international trips, expensive etiquette classes. The daughter of influential business owners, she grew up hearing that she was destined to hold high positions, not through merit, but through entitlement. That conviction shaped her character. She believed elegance, status, and appearance were enough to open doors. And, in fact, to some extent, it worked. Always impeccably dressed, she carried with her a studied posture, a calculated smile, and a voice that mixed charm with arrogance. The moment she entered any room, she knew exactly how to place herself so that everyone would notice. That day, upon arriving at the company, Her expensive perfume announced her presence even before her heels touched the marble floor. She carried a leather briefcase imported from abroad and wore a luxury watch that gleamed on her wrist. Every detail seemed rehearsed to broadcast superiority. Sitting next to Hannah, so simple in comparison, was for Victoria like looking at everything she despised. Her rival's modest dress, the unbranded shoes, the discreet handbag, all of it irritated her. In her mind, people like that had no right to compete for the same position as her. "Do you really think you have a chance here?" she whispered, leaning toward Hannah. Hannah remained silent, only taking a deep breath. "Well," Victoria continued, forcing a smile, "it's good to have dreams. Some people need them to survive." These little barbs were part of her strategy. Victoria knew how to play with other people's insecurities. She always placed herself as the most prepared, the most intelligent, the most natural choice for the position. The problem was that behind this facade, there was something fragile. What few knew was that her shining resume had shadows. Many of the courses she boasted were, in fact, bought or exaggerated certificates. Her professional experiences were described in inflated terms, often far from reality. She mastered the art of self-promotion, but when it came to delivering real results, there was always someone else to cover her flaws. That's why, when she noticed Hannah's presence, something stirred inside her. There was a spark in her rival's eyes, a different calmness that made her feel deeply uneasy. It was as if, instinctively, she sensed that the simple girl hid something that could outshine her carefully crafted facade. And Victoria was not willing to allow that. Inside herself, a plan began to form. If Hannah showed any sign of brilliance, she would make sure to extinguish it. She would use rumors, irony, or even direct sabotage if necessary. After all, in her mind, it was better to destroy the other than to risk being surpassed. While waiting for the first stage, Victoria crossed her legs and straightened her briefcase on her lap. Her eyes scanned the room as if she already owned it. Yet, from time to time, they returned to Hannah, analyzing her like a predator watches prey. "It will be interesting to see how long you last," she murmured to herself, smiling. And so, at the very moment destiny placed two candidates side by side, a conflict was born that would guide the entire interview. On one side, ambition disguised as confidence. On the other, simplicity carrying truth. The stage was set. Richard Collins was a methodical man. His entire life had been built on rules, spreadsheets, and numbers. At 52, he held the position of human resources manager with the pride of someone who believed himself to be an excellent judge of character. But there was one detail that made him flawed. He almost always judged by appearances. To Collins, a good candidate was one who arrived in an impeccable suit, with a dazzling resume and sharp speech. He believed that posture and status said more than any test. He was a practical man, but also a skeptic. He liked to feel in control, convinced that he could see through any candidate in just a few seconds. That morning, when he saw Victoria, he discreetly nodded with approval. She was exactly the kind of profile he expected for that position, confident, elegant, carrying every signal of someone who belonged at the top. But when his eyes landed on Hannah, he couldn't help a faint smile of disbelief. "I see we have quite an interesting mix today," he commented, adjusting his glasses. His voice sounded as if he had already predicted the outcome. To him, Hannah was just a symbolic presence, almost a waste of time. Her modest dress, her reserved demeanor, her unpolished shoes, all of it, in his mind, revealed a lack of preparation. When he led them into the first testing room, Collins walked with long, decisive strides, like a general leading soldiers. When he spoke, his words were fast, impersonal, full of formality. "Welcome to the selection process. We will have several stages today. We'll be observing not only your answers, but also how you behave under pressure." His eyes turned to Victoria, who smiled confidently, and then to Hannah, whose expression was calm, even though her heart was racing. "I hope you are ready." Inside himself, Collins had already made a silent decision. Victoria was the favorite. It was almost as if the interview were nothing more than a ritual to confirm the obvious. As the candidates settled in, he discreetly observed the details. The confident way Victoria opened her leather briefcase, her impeccable posture, her prepared smile. Then, he noticed Hannah holding a simple pen, breathing deeply as if she carried an entire world of memories within her chest. To Collins, this was a sign of insecurity. To Destiny, it was only the foreshadowing of something greater. During the next few minutes, he walked between the desks, circling like a watchful examiner. Victoria always sought his gaze, as if trying to impress him. Hannah, on the other hand, remained focused, almost indifferent, to the game of appearances. "Remember," said Collins, in a nearly professorial tone, "this company values excellence, discipline, and results. Only the best succeed." As he said this, he cast a look of approval toward Victoria. The message was clear, though unspoken. Hannah would have to fight against more than just the tests. She would have to fight against the silent prejudice of a manager who had already judged her before the first answer. But what Collins couldn't imagine was that this same prejudice, which made him laugh at Hannah's simplicity, would also be the hardest lesson he would ever learn in his career. And what had begun as a common selection process was about to become something that would mark everyone involved forever. The testing room was wide, illuminated by white lights that reflected on the light wooden tables. Silence was almost absolute, broken only by the slight scraping of chairs and the sound of papers being handed out. Hannah sat at her desk, adjusted the simple pen between her fingers, and took a deep breath. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but her mind reached for the calm she had learned to cultivate through years of solitary study. Victoria, at her side, opened her leather briefcase with an elegant gesture, pulled out a golden pen, and smiled as if it were a fashion show. She glanced discreetly at Hannah and let a venomous comment slip. "I hope you can at least finish the test, dear." Hannah did not answer. She simply lowered her face and focused on the paper before her. The clock had started ticking. The first questions were about logic and mathematical reasoning. Many candidates frowned, hesitating as they read the instructions. Victoria, impatient, bit the end of her pen while furiously scribbling, convinced that speed was a sign of intelligence. Hannah, however, analyzed each question carefully. Her eyes ran across the lines as if she were deciphering a riddle, and within minutes, she began writing fluently, without hesitation. Richard Collins, who was watching attentively, noticed her calmness but misinterpreted it. He walked closer, looked over Hannah's shoulder, and his lips curved into a skeptical smile. "Focus, miss," he whispered. Hannah simply nodded, unshaken. She was used to that kind of look, that doubt etched on people's faces. And, as many times before, she knew the answer would come at the right moment. Gradually, the room was overtaken by different rhythms. Some candidates sweated, others chewed their nails. Victoria scribbled furiously, but her pages were full of corrections and messy cross-outs. Hannah, in contrast, kept a steady, serene pace, as if she were following a silent melody inside her. After half an hour, Hannah closed the test. She looked at the clock on the wall, took a deep breath, and calmly reviewed each answer. Her mind worked with clarity, the result of years of training alone, free from distractions. The sound of turning pages around her felt distant, as if she were in another place, immersed in her own certainty. Victoria noticed, and it disturbed her deeply. "Finished already?" she asked in a challenging tone when she saw Hannah lay her pen on the desk. "I'm reviewing," the young woman replied, her voice steady. "Incredible. Some people seem to think this is easy. We'll see once they grade it." Collins, walking among the desks, noticed Hannah was among the first to finish. He couldn't avoid an expression of surprise, but quickly repressed it. He scribbled something on his clipboard and moved on, returning his attention to Victoria, who was still struggling with the calculations. When time was up, everyone turned in their tests. Hannah was one of the first to rise, handing her paper over with steady hands. Collins took the sheet, gave it a quick look, and said nothing, though inside he thought, Could it have been luck? As he collected the tests, tension filled the air. Victoria handed hers in last, with a theatrical sigh, as if she had just finished a monumental task. On the way out of the room, she leaned toward Hannah and whispered in her ear, "Enjoy this streak of luck while you can. It won't last long." Hannah didn't answer. She walked calmly into the corridor, where sunlight poured through tall glass windows. She felt a knot in her stomach, but also a discreet flame of confidence. She knew she had done her best. On the other hand, Victoria was restless. The fact that Hannah had finished before her left her unsettled. And from that discomfort grew a dangerous feeling: envy. It was as if every simple gesture from her rival was a threat to the empire of appearances she had built her whole life. In the hallway, candidates murmured about how difficult the test was. Many admitted they hadn't managed to finish. Some glanced curiously at Hannah, wondering how someone so discreet could seem so calm. Collins, watching from a distance, was mentally noting his impressions. Victoria, with all her confident posture, did not seem as solid as he had imagined. Hannah, on the other hand, was surprisingly steady, but he still wasn't convinced. To him, the real test was yet to come, and as the hallways filled with anxious voices, destiny prepared the next stage. Because what had just taken place was only the first battle. The war for the position had only begun. The assistant opened the door to the next room, inviting the candidates inside. The space was different from the previous one. A round table in the center, chairs arranged in a circle, and a whiteboard leaning against the wall. The atmosphere was less formal, but thick with expectation. This was the group dynamic stage, where it wasn't enough to answer alone. One had to show leadership, teamwork, and creativity. Hannah walked in quietly, choosing a discreet seat, while Victoria strutted in as if she owned the place. Taking a chair directly across from Richard Collins, who was watching everything with his cold, calculating eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Collins began, his tone professional. "Now I want to see how you work in a group. Each team will receive a real company problem and must present a solution within the time limit. We're not just evaluating your ideas, but also how you collaborate." The candidates nodded. One of the envelopes was handed to Hannah and Victoria's team. The challenge was complex: create a plan for the company to expand into another country, taking into account culture, communication, and logistics. Victoria immediately seized the moment. "Well, of course I should lead the team," she said with a confident smile. "I have international experience and have worked on similar projects before." Collins raised an eyebrow, as if approving of her attitude. The other team members, a little intimidated, silently agreed. Hannah stayed quiet, observing. Victoria started talking loudly, throwing out quick ideas without letting others speak. She scribbled keywords on the board, but her suggestions were shallow. Create campaigns, use social media, form partnerships. They were flashy phrases, but with no real substance. Meanwhile, Hannah calmly analyzed the problem. She recalled articles she had read, examples of companies in different countries, and local customs that could influence outcomes. She quietly jotted down notes, waiting for the right moment. "We need more detail." One candidate hesitated. "How do we handle cultural barriers?" Victoria waved dismissively. "That's not relevant. Marketing solves everything." Hannah lifted her eyes and, for the first time, intervened, her voice serene but firm. "Actually, it's essential. If we don't understand the culture of the country, we could fail before even starting. A campaign that works here could be offensive there." The group fell silent. Collins, skeptical until then, tilted his head slightly. Victoria, annoyed, crossed her arms. "And what would your idea be, Hannah?" she asked with irony. Hannah took a deep breath and began explaining her observations. She talked about the importance of translating not just the language, but the tone of communication. How colors in advertising carry different meanings in each culture. The need to hire local professionals to ensure authenticity. Her speech was clear, without exaggeration, but each word seemed to open new doors for her teammates. One of the men nodded enthusiastically. That makes sense. I've even heard that the use of symbols can completely change how a message is received. Victoria tried to interrupt, but Hannah continued, adding practical data and feasible suggestions. Soon, the group leaned toward her, asking for more input, more details. In minutes, the leadership Victoria had seized arrogantly melted away before Hannah's natural authority. Time was called, and each team presented their proposals. When it was their turn, Victoria tried to open the pitch, hoping to reclaim her spotlight, but the teammates quickly asked Hannah to explain. Initially shy, Hannah spoke with clarity, detailing the points of their plan. Collins said nothing, only scribbling quickly on his notepad, but his eyes were no longer the same as before. When they left the room, Victoria's face was tight with anger. "Do you think outshining me is going to help you?" she hissed at Hannah, teeth clenched. "Be careful, because this isn't over." Hannah looked at her calmly. "I'm not trying to outshine you. I'm just doing my best." Victoria didn't reply. She only turned away, heels striking the floor with sharp, angry echoes. From a distance, Collins still resisted admitting it, but something inside him was shifting. There was a different kind of light in that simple girl. A light he wasn't ready to acknowledge, but could no longer ignore. And as the next stage approached, the tension grew thicker. For Victoria, the competition was no longer about the position. It had become a personal war. The break between stages brought some relief to the candidates. In the lobby, some laughed nervously, others exchanged business cards as if they were already hired. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with conversations and the clinking of cups. Hannah sat in a corner, using the moment to mentally review her answers. Her face remained serene, but her heart was beating fast. This wasn't just an interview. It was her chance to prove that all her effort had been worth it. Victoria, however, was not willing to lose. Her smile stayed fixed on her lips, but her eyes betrayed irritation. The scene from the previous stage, watching Hannah naturally steal the spotlight, had pierced her pride like a blade. As Hannah set her bag down on the table and went to get a cup of water, Victoria seized her chance. She walked over casually, glanced around to make sure no one was watching, and discreetly pulled one of Hannah's papers that stuck out from the folder. Pretending to cough, she spilled a few drops of coffee nearby. The liquid spread quickly across the table, staining Hannah's notes. "Oh, how careless of me," Victoria said softly, disguising a smile. "Such a shame, some things aren't so easy to clean." Hannah returned just in time to see the mess. The paper was partly ruined, but there was no time to dwell on it. She took a deep breath, pulled out another notebook, and began rewriting, ignoring Victoria's triumphant look. "You shouldn't worry so much about details," Victoria muttered. "After all, it's only a matter of time before they realize who really belongs here." The words were venom, but Hannah didn't react. She kept writing, fingers steady, mind focused. She was used to being tested, provoked, underestimated. This wouldn't break her. Richard Collins, on the other side of the lobby, noticed the scene with suspicion. He hadn't seen exactly what happened, but the tension between them was obvious. He jotted down another observation on his clipboard, unaware that the rivalry concealed something far deeper. The break ended, and everyone was called back. Hannah held her new notes, still faintly smelling of coffee, but showing no sign of weakness. As they walked down the corridor, Victoria leaned toward her and whispered again, "You might have done well earlier, but it won't last. Believe me, I always get what I want." Hannah kept her gaze forward, refusing to play the game. "Then maybe it's time for you to learn that it doesn't always work that way." The words, simple and calm, hit Victoria harder than any direct confrontation. Behind her haughty expression, her pride burned. The group entered the next room, but the atmosphere had shifted. Hannah, despite the sabotage, remained steady. Victoria, though she tried to appear confident, carried within her a growing shadow of insecurity. The game of appearances was becoming dangerous. What had started as just a job competition was now a clash of character. And destiny, silent as ever, was preparing to reveal the truth. Laura had always been a dedicated employee in the human resources department. Unlike Richard Collins, she wasn't so easily fooled by appearances. Naturally observant, she believed that an interview didn't just reveal resumes but also character. And from the very beginning, something about Victoria bothered her. That morning, while collecting documents, Laura noticed an inconsistency. The diploma from a French university that Victoria had presented had a seal that was slightly misaligned, almost imperceptible to untrained eyes, but obvious to someone who had handled hundreds of certificates. She made a mental note and decided to investigate later. Throughout the stages, she kept her attention sharp. She saw the way Victoria always tried to push herself to the front, talking more than necessary, and the way she looked at Hannah with disdain. She also didn't miss the scene in the lobby, when coffee spilled over Hannah's notes. Laura had no proof, but her instincts told her it hadn't been an accident. During the lunch break, Laura took her chance. She called a contact in Paris and asked for a quick verification of Victoria's supposed diploma. While waiting for a reply, she accessed internal databases and noticed other irregularities, incompatible dates, mismatched signatures, courses that no longer even existed. Interesting, she murmured as she typed each detail into her computer. Down the hall, Hannah passed by carrying a simple lunchbox, probably homemade. She greeted Laura with a shy smile before heading to the break area. That genuine simplicity stood in stark contrast to Victoria's performative arrogance. A short while later, Laura's phone rang. The confirmation was clear. The French diploma was fake. The university had never issued such a document. Her heart raced. This wasn't just an irregularity, it was fraud. Worse still, there was a risk that the candidate was actively trying to sabotage another participant. She had to be careful. Laura decided to watch a little longer before escalating the matter to the CEO. In the afternoon stage, the candidates gathered again. Laura positioned herself discreetly in the back of the room, her eyes watchful. Victoria once again tried to dominate the floor. Hannah, on the other hand, remained steady, speaking calmly when called upon. At one point, Laura noticed Victoria's hand sliding toward Hannah's bag, while everyone was focused on a presentation at the board. Quietly, she stepped closer, and what she saw confirmed her suspicions. Victoria was pulling out one of Hannah's notes, quickly folding it and trying to hide it. "What are you doing?" Laura asked in a low, firm voice. Victoria startled, nearly dropping the paper. She forced a smile. "Oh, nothing. Just helping to tidy her desk." Laura crossed her arms. "That doesn't look like help to me. Put it back now." Victoria obeyed, her face flushing red, and sat down again. Hannah, unaware of what had just happened, stayed focused on the activity. At that moment, Laura was certain she had to intervene. She couldn't let fraud destroy the opportunity of someone genuinely talented. When the stage ended, she walked up to Richard Collins, who was making his usual notes. "We need to talk," she said firmly. "Later, Laura. I'm busy." "No, this is important." Collins sighed, irritated, but followed her into a reserved room. There, Laura laid out the evidence, the fake diplomas, the inconsistencies, and the attempt at sabotage she had personally witnessed. Richard stayed silent for several seconds, his expression hard. "This is serious," he muttered, "but we need absolute certainty before accusing her." "I already have certainty," Laura replied firmly. "The question is, are we going to turn a blind eye, or are we going to face the truth?" Collins took a deep breath. Inside, he felt conflicted. Part of him resisted admitting he had been wrong in favoring Victoria from the start. But the facts were there, undeniable. "Very well," he finally said. "We'll take this to the CEO, but I want to be present." Laura nodded. Meanwhile, Hannah remained unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. To her, Each stage was just another chance to prove who she was. Even though she faced suspicious glances and small humiliations, she stood firm, remembering her mother's words. The truth always comes out. And now, that truth was about to explode in the final interview. The company clock was striking close to 5 in the afternoon when the candidates were called in for the final round. The hallway that led to the interview room felt longer than ever. The sound of footsteps echoed across the marble floor, blending with the heavy breathing of each participant. The air was thick with expectation and nervousness. On the door, a silver plaque gleamed under the light boardroom. It was there that the decisive interview would take place, in front of the CEO, the man who would determine their futures. Hannah entered quietly, her eyes sweeping over the imposing room. It was spacious, with huge windows, showcasing the city glowing in the golden light of sunset. A dark wooden table dominated the space, and behind it sat Mr. Donovan, the company's CEO, a man of commanding presence, with penetrating eyes and a deep voice that seemed to fill the room. To his side sat Richard Collins and Laura, ready to evaluate. Collins maintained his rigid posture, though inside, he was torn by the discoveries Laura had made. Victoria entered right after, smiling with full confidence. She walked as if she had already won the job. Her high heels clicked firmly on the floor, her perfume spreading through the air. She sat directly in front of the CEO, crossing her legs with practiced ease. Hannah took the chair beside her, remaining modest. Donovan began, his eyes carefully studying each face. This is the final stage. I want to hear from each of you. I want to see how you think, how you communicate, and how you can contribute to this company. He called on Victoria first. She stood, adjusted her hair, and began speaking eloquently. Her sentences were polished, full of technical terms, but they sounded rehearsed. She spoke more to impress than to actually present solid ideas. Donovan listened, serious, without interrupting, but his eyes revealed no enthusiasm. When Victoria finished, silence weighed heavily. She smiled, waiting for praise, but Donovan merely gave a curt nod. "Miss Hannah," he said, turning his gaze to the young woman. "It's your turn." Hannah took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly, but she rose calmly. She walked to the center of the room, feeling the weight of every eye on her. For a brief moment, her mother's words echoed in her memory. "Show them who you are. You don't need anything but the truth." "Mr. Donovan, esteemed evaluators," she began, her voice serene. "Perhaps I don't have the prestigious titles or the extensive experience that other candidates present, but what I bring with me is the result of years of discipline, effort, and passion for knowledge." Collins adjusted his glasses, still skeptical. Victoria rolled her eyes. Hannah continued, "Since childhood, I've learned that the greatest investment we can make is in ourselves. My life has been simple, often difficult, but I found strength in books and study, and I believe I can bring that to this company. The ability to learn, to adapt, and to overcome challenges with perseverance." Donovan leaned forward on the table. "And how do you intend to prove that?" he asked bluntly. Hannah drew in another deep breath. Her eyes shone. "Allow me to demonstrate." The room fell silent. Then she began. First, in English, she delivered a brief statement about innovation. Next, she shifted into French, speaking of the importance of culture in global markets. Then, in German, she highlighted the value of discipline and organization. With each change of language, the expressions in the room transformed. Surprise, admiration, shock. In Italian, her words sounded melodic. In Japanese, sharp and precise. In Mandarin, firm and steady. In Arabic, deep and lyrical. She concluded in Portuguese, with a simple but powerful phrase, "Knowledge is the true wealth." The echo of her words lingered in the air. For several seconds, no one even breathed. Laura smiled discreetly, moved. Collins, who had once laughed at her inwardly, felt his face burn with shame. Victoria, pale, tried to mask her shock, but her eyes betrayed her despair. Donovan, visibly impressed, rose from his chair. He walked over to Hannah, stopped in front of her, and said, "In all my years at this company, I have rarely seen anything like this. This isn't just talent. This is dedication. This is courage, and that cannot be bought." He turned to Collins. "You underestimated her." Collins swallowed hard. I was wrong. Completely wrong." Victoria attempted to interject. "Mr. Donovan, with all due respect, I also have a lot to offer. Those languages don't guarantee she's the right choice." Before she could continue, Laura rose firmly. "Excuse me, sir, but there's something you need to know." Everyone turned toward her. Laura laid the documents she had gathered onto the table. "The diplomas presented by Victoria are fraudulent. I confirmed with the institutions. Moreover, I personally witnessed her attempting to tamper with Hannah's notes during one of the stages." The silence cracked into murmurs of shock. Victoria froze, speechless. Donovan looked at her sternly. "You are disqualified. And this matter will be referred to the proper authorities." The color drained from Victoria's face. For a moment, it seemed she might faint. But instead, she lowered her head, defeated. Meanwhile, Hannah stood still, her heart racing. She hadn't celebrated or exalted herself. She simply held on to the serenity that had carried her through. Donovan approached her again. "You have what we are looking for. The position is yours." The words struck her ears like music. The world seemed to spin for a moment, and tears brimmed in her eyes. She thought of her mother, of every night she had studied alone, of every time she had been ridiculed. In that instant, it all made sense. And so, before the CEO and everyone present, the truth was revealed. It wasn't appearance, nor fake diplomas, but essence and effort that shaped the future. The silence that lingered in the room after Donovan's decision seemed to have weight. No external sound dared to break that moment. Even the air conditioning, which had been humming steadily, now felt quieter, as if the room itself were holding its breath after what had just taken place. Hannah remained standing, her hands slightly trembling, but her gaze steady. Inside her chest, her heart pounded like a drum, yet her posture radiated serenity, like someone who knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Donovan, still standing before her, repeated solemnly, "The position is yours, Hannah." Those words fell over her like rain on dry soil. A shiver ran down her skin, and for a fleeting moment, the image of her mother filled her mind. Helena smiling, holding her hands on so many nights of study, whispering, "One day, someone will see what you carry inside." Tears threatened to spill, but Hannah breathed deeply, steadying herself. She knew this wasn't the time to collapse into emotion. This was the moment to show her truth. She turned to the table, where Collins was watching her. The HR manager, who had mocked her in silence, now avoided her eyes. The weight of his mistake pressed heavily on his shoulders, but Hannah's heart held no resentment. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said, her voice calm. "All I ever wanted was the chance to show my worth." Laura smiled discreetly, proud. She knew this moment wasn't just Hannah's victory. It was a lesson for everyone in that room. Donovan gestured for her to sit again. "I'd like to hear more from you. Tell us about your story." She drew in a breath, looked at them all, and began. "I grew up in a modest home. My mother worked tirelessly to provide the basics. I didn't have access to expensive courses or prestigious schools, but I had books, secondhand borrowed books, and an immense hunger to learn." As she spoke, the memories came vividly: scribbled notebooks, hours in the public library, the old radio that crackled with foreign voices. As a child, I would listen to international broadcasts. I didn't understand a word, but I fell in love with the sounds. I wanted to know what those words meant, to understand other cultures, other people, so I began teaching myself. One language, then another, then another. Collins lifted his eyes, surprised. He had never imagined that the simple girl before him carried such discipline. I never had diplomas to prove what I knew, Hannah continued. But I discovered that true knowledge isn't in certificates. It's in practice, in dedication, in the persistence of never giving up. Donovan leaned on the table, watching her with genuine admiration. And that is exactly what we seek in this company, he said. People who don't just collect titles, but who carry passion, truth, and resilience. Victoria, sitting aside, no longer had strength to argue. Her face was pale, her eyes glassy, not from emotion, but from shame. The mask of confidence had shattered, leaving nothing but the emptiness of a life built on illusions. Hannah finished with simple words. If I am chosen, I will give my best every day. Because I'm not here just for myself, but for everything I've lived to get here. The room fell silent once again. Unexpectedly, Collins stood up. The movement startled everyone. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and said, Hannah, I must apologize. From the very beginning, I misjudged you. I laughed at your simplicity, doubted you before you ever spoke a word. I was unjust, and I was wrong. It wasn't common to hear Collins admit mistakes, let alone in front of the CEO. Hannah met his gaze, and her eyes held only compassion. I understand. Many have judged me the same way, but I believe we all have the chance to learn and change. Collins nodded, moved, feeling small before the greatness of this young woman. Donovan rose once more, bringing the session to a close. It's decided. Hannah, welcome to the company. You have shown us something that cannot be measured on a resume character, and that is worth more than any title. Hannah sat again, her body still buzzing with emotion. Inside, she felt as though she had climbed a mountain after years of struggle. The view was breathtaking, but it was the path that made it priceless. And as she left the room, the sound of her own footsteps echoed like a new melody, marking the beginning of a different story. Though her heart was brimming with joy, Hannah knew the greatest challenge would begin from that moment on, proving each day that her loyalty, her commitment, and her love of learning were as solid as they seemed in that pivotal interview. The hallway was silent as the candidates left the boardroom. The click of Victoria's heels echoed louder than ever. But this time it did not carry confidence. They were heavy, almost trembling steps, betraying the weight of shame. Laura walked close behind her, holding the folder with evidence of the falsified resume. Collins trailed them, his face stiff, still grappling with the cascade of errors he had made. Hannah walked a few paces further back, each step making her heart beat faster. As if the victory she had just achieved still needed the silence of the moment to be fully confirmed. Halfway down the hall, Donovan's voice rang out. Miss Victoria, I need a word with you. She stopped, turned slowly, forcing a smile that no longer convinced anyone. Of course, Mr. Donovan, she answered, her voice wavering. They entered a small meeting room. Laura spread the documents across the table, each sheet sliding against the polished surface like a gavel striking down. These are the certificates you submitted, Laura began. But after contacting the institutions, it has been confirmed they are false. Victoria's eyes widened, but she quickly tried to compose herself. There must be some mistake. Perhaps the university records aren't updated. Don't bother, Laura cut her off, firm. I spoke personally with the administrators. There is no record of your name. Donovan crossed his arms, his piercing gaze locked on the candidate. In addition, he said, we've had a report of you attempting to sabotage another participant. Victoria swallowed hard, her hands damp with sweat. She looked toward Collins as if seeking an ally, but he averted his eyes, unable to defend her after everything. I just wanted to prove that I deserved the position, she murmured, her voice trembling. I did what I thought was necessary. Donovan leaned across the table, his presence imposing. What you did was dishonest. And in this company, there is no room for lies. The words landed like a verdict. Victoria lowered her head, her shoulders slumping. The aura of superiority was gone. What followed was a silence so sharp, it felt as though they were all witnessing not just the downfall of a candidate, but the collapse of a life built on appearances. Collins finally spoke. "Mr. Donovan, I take some responsibility here. I favored her from the beginning. I was blind." Donovan gave him a stern but thoughtful look. "What matters now, Richard, is that you learn from this." Victoria's voice came out almost in a whisper. "So that's it, I'm disqualified." "More than that," Donovan replied. "You will be investigated. Presenting falsified documents is a crime." The color drained from her face. For a moment, it looked as if she might faint. Instead, she simply nodded, defeated. Laura gathered the papers and, with a discreet gesture, escorted Victoria out. Hannah watched from a distance, without gloating. Her heart felt only a mixture of sadness and relief. She knew envy and arrogance had been Victoria's undoing. When the door closed behind her, the hallway fell silent once more. The only sound left was Hannah's steady breathing, and beside her, Colin staring at the floor, crushed by guilt. His error would not be easy to forget. The boardroom remained hushed after Victoria's exit. It was as if the very air had changed in density, lighter for some, heavier for others. Hannah was still seated, her hands resting in her lap, but her posture radiated dignity. Her heart was still racing, yet her eyes shone with calm determination. Donovan rose slowly and walked to the window. He stood there for a moment, gazing at the city below, the buildings bathed in the glow of dusk. His silence was not hesitation but reflection, as if he were weighing not just the decision at hand but the meaning of everything that had just unfolded. At last, he turned back to the room. This company was built on values that cannot be bought: hard work, resilience, and truth. Today, we witnessed how easily those values can be forgotten by some, but also how brightly they can shine in others. His eyes fixed on Hannah. "You did not come here with a stack of impressive diplomas, nor with an appearance carefully crafted to impress. You came with the truth. And more than any resume, that is what matters to us." The words fell over Hannah like sunlight breaking through clouds. A knot rose in her throat, but she managed to answer with steady voice, "Thank you, sir. All I ever wanted was the chance to prove myself." Donovan gave a faint smile. "And that chance is yours. The position is officially yours." Laura's lips curved into a proud smile, knowing justice had been done. Collins, seated rigidly, lowered his eyes, his face burning with shame. The clatter of his pen as it slipped from his hand onto the table cut the silence, a symbolic surrender. He cleared his throat and spoke, his voice heavy with humility. "Hannah, I owe you an apology. From the very beginning, I dismissed you. I laughed at your simplicity, doubted you before you even spoke. I was wrong, terribly wrong." The admission surprised everyone. Collins was not a man known for confessing mistakes, much less in front of the CEO. Hannah looked at him with calm eyes, no trace of bitterness. "I understand, Mr. Collins. I've been judged like that many times before, but I believe we all have the chance to learn and change." Collins nodded, moved, and felt smaller before her quiet greatness. Donovan took back the floor. "Let this be a lesson for all of us. True wealth isn't in papers or appearances. It lies in effort, in character, and in dedication. Hannah, we expect great things from you." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her composure. She knew this was just the first step of a long journey. The other candidates were dismissed soon after, and within minutes the room had nearly emptied. Only Hannah, Donovan, Collins, and Laura remained. Donovan approached her and extended his hand. "Welcome to our team." Hannah clasped his hand, feeling the firmness of the gesture. It was the recognition she had waited her whole life to receive, not out of vanity, but as proof that her struggle had been worth it. As she stepped out of the room, the echo of her footsteps felt like a new rhythm, marking the start of a different story. And though joy swelled in her heart, she knew her biggest challenge lay ahead, to prove every single day that her loyalty, commitment, and love of learning were as solid as they appeared in that final interview. The sun was already setting when Hannah left the company building. The city felt different that evening, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple, people hurrying along the sidewalks, car horns blending with the distant song of a street musician. Everything seemed more alive, more intense, as if the whole world were celebrating with her. She clutched her modest bag to her chest, and with each step, her heart brimmed with joy. For a moment, she closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, allowing herself to believe it. She had made it. The bus ride home rocked her gently, but Hannah barely noticed. Her thoughts were filled with vivid images, Donovan's stern gaze softening into respect, the shock on Collins's face, the stunned silence when she spoke in 9 languages. It all felt like a dream she never wanted to wake from. When she got off at her neighborhood stop, the narrow streets and modest houses welcomed her as always. Neighbors waved from porches, and Hannah smiled back, keeping close the secret burning warmly in her chest. Opening the door to her home, she was greeted by the smell of warm soup. Her mother, Helena, was in the kitchen. She looked up, and at once, she knew something had changed in her daughter's eyes. "So?" Helena asked, drying her hands on her apron. "How did it go?" Hannah set her bag on a chair and rushed to her mother, throwing her arms around her. Words tumbled out quickly, mixed with tears of joy. "I got it, Mom. The job is mine." Helena hugged her tightly, her own tears flowing freely. The lines of weariness on her face softened with pride. "I knew it, sweetheart. I always knew this day would come." They sat at the table, and Hannah recounted every detail. The tough exams, Victoria's provocations, Collins's doubt, the final revelation before the CEO. She described how it felt to speak in 9 languages, and how the silence in the room had given her more strength than any applause ever could. Helena listened with shining eyes, her hands clasped over her daughter's. "And what did you tell them in the end?" she asked. Hannah smiled, remembering. "I told them that if chosen, I would give my very best every single day, and that's exactly what I'm going to do, Mom. Each day I walk into that company, I'll go in with loyalty, dedication, and gratitude." Helena squeezed her hands warmly. "That's what makes you special, Hannah. Not the languages, not the tests. It's your heart." At that moment, with the smell of soup filling the kitchen and the distant sound of children playing outside, Hannah felt a deep peace. She hadn't just won a job, she had triumphed over years of doubt, disdainful looks, and silent battles. And she knew from then on, she carried with her the unshakable truth: nothing is stronger than honesty and perseverance. The next morning, the company building seemed even more imposing to Hannah. The sunlight glinted off the tall glass walls, while employees hurried through the revolving doors, briefcases in hand, voices blending into a steady hum of activity. The metallic sound of the elevators, the buzz of conversations in the lobby, everything seemed to announce the start of her new chapter. Hannah walked in with steady steps, carrying the same simplicity she always had. But in her heart, there was a renewed sense of purpose. In her bag was a fresh notebook, ready to be filled with every lesson she would learn. Her eyes reflected humility, but also determination. As she crossed the lobby, she spotted Richard Collins waiting near reception. The HR manager no longer bore the same imposing posture of the days before. His face was more serious, his eyes contemplative. When he saw Hannah, he straightened his shoulders, took a deep breath, and approached her. "Hannah," he began, his voice less firm than usual. "May I have a word?" She nodded, and they moved aside to a quiet corner. Collins adjusted his glasses, glanced at the floor, and then met her eyes. "I need to say something that isn't easy for me. Yesterday, throughout the process, I misjudged you. I laughed at your simplicity, dismissed you before you even had the chance to speak. I was unfair, and I was wrong." The words came out heavily, as though each one carried the weight of years of arrogance. "I've spent my career believing I could size people up by appearances, by resumes full of titles. But you showed me how blind I've been. I want to sincerely apologize." Hannah held his gaze calmly. Inside, there was no resentment, only the memory of countless times she had been underestimated before. "I understand, Mr. Collins," she replied softly but firmly. "I've been judged that way many times. But I believe everyone can learn from their mistakes." For a moment, Collins had no words. Her response disarmed him completely. Her grace and forgiveness felt like a lesson greater than any he had ever taught in his career. Slowly, a faint but genuine smile touched his lips. "You are wiser than many veterans in this company. And believe me, I've learned a great deal from you." Hannah smiled back, and in that instant, something shifted. The wall that had separated them crumbled, replaced by respect. Later that day, Collins quietly observed her at work. He noticed the way she listened attentively to instructions, how carefully she wrote notes in her new notebook, how she approached each task with focus and humility. She wasn't trying to prove anything through loud displays, only through consistent dedication. And for Collins, it was like finally seeing the obvious, that true talent and character cannot be measured by appearance. As he watched her, he realized that the interview wasn't just a turning point for Hannah. It had also been one of the most important lessons of his own career. The days that followed were intense. Hannah arrived early, often before many of the staff, and left late, always with her notebook in hand, filled with observations and lessons. Each morning, she passed through the lobby with a modest smile, greeting everyone from the receptionist to the security guards. Her humility made her stand out, and within weeks her name was already known throughout the building. Donovan, the CEO, observed her from a distance. It wasn't common for him to personally keep an eye on new employees, but there was something about Hannah that impressed him deeply. More than the 9 languages she spoke, it was the way she carried herself, the seriousness with which she approached even the smallest task, the respect with which she treated everyone, the steadiness that remained unshaken even under pressure. One afternoon, after a meeting, Donovan called her into his office. "Hannah," he said, gesturing for her to sit, "I want you to know that your presence here is already making a difference. The reports you've delivered have been flawless, and your dedication has inspired others." Hannah blushed slightly, lowering her gaze. "Thank you, sir. I'm only doing my best." "And that," Donovan replied, "is exactly what makes you remarkable. Never forget it. We didn't hire you just for what you know, but for who you are." His words sank deep into her heart. She thought of her mother, of the small kitchen, the old notebooks, the radio hissing with foreign voices. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night had brought her here, and now she could see clearly. It had all been worth it. Richard Collins, too, had changed. He became one of her strongest supporters, often defending her ideas in meetings. It wasn't unusual to hear him say, "If you want an example of discipline and loyalty, look at Hannah." For her, those words weren't a cause for pride, but for gratitude. She understood that her journey had transformed not only her life, but also the perspective of those around her. Weeks turned into months. Hannah grew within the company, not through noise or arrogance, but through consistency. Her loyalty and quiet strength made her respected by all. Donovan often praised her publicly, reminding the team that the greatest talent isn't found in appearances, but in character. Every evening, when she returned home, she sat at the kitchen table with her mother, recounting the day's events. And she repeated the promise she had made from the beginning. "Mom, every single day, I will give my best. Always." Helena listened, with tears in her eyes, proud to see her daughter building a future with the same honesty and dedication she had always carried. Time would show that this interview hadn't been merely the start of a career. It had been the beginning of a new life for Hannah, for her mother, and even for those who had learned from her to look beyond appearances. Because in the end, it wasn't the 9 languages that defined her, it was her truth. Some stories seem to begin small, almost unnoticed, but end up echoing far beyond what we imagined. Hannah's story is one of them. A young woman underestimated for her appearance, and her background showed that true greatness is not in what we display on the outside, but in what we cultivate within. Along her path, she faced scornful looks, ridicule, and even attempts to sabotage her. There were those who believed that a polished resume was enough to cover the lack of character. But in the end, the truth spoke louder. The truth Hannah carried in every word, in every gesture, in every silent night of study. What is most beautiful is that this victory wasn't hers alone. It was her mother's, who supported her in silence. It was Laura's, the HR employee who believed in justice. It was even Richard Collins's, who learned to recognize the worth of someone he once dismissed. And, above all, it is a victory that echoes for us, the spectators of this story, a powerful reminder that no one should be judged by appearances. How many times in our own lives have we been underestimated? How many times have we been told we weren't good enough, that we didn't have the right titles, clothes, or background to deserve a place? Hannah's journey is an invitation to believe that yes, it is possible to triumph, even when the world doubts us. The secret lies in perseverance, in staying true to who we are, and in refusing to let arrogance define our worth. Here lies a lasting lesson. Knowledge can open doors, but character is what keeps them open. Hannah did not succeed only because she spoke 9 languages. She succeeded because every word she spoke carried truth, discipline, and resilience. That is something no one can fake. If you've watched this story until now, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for spending this time with us, for allowing yourself to feel and reflect through this narrative. Stories like this remind us of what truly matters in life, the courage to be who we are, even when the world tries to silence us. And now, I ask something of you. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the Lasting Tales channel and activate the notification bell, so you won't miss the next stories we prepare with such care for you. I'd also love to hear your voice. Have you ever lived through a moment when you were underestimated but proved your worth? Share it in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else who needs encouragement to keep going. We read every comment with attention and affection, and don't stop here. There are many more stories waiting for you on this channel. Narratives that reach deep into the soul and show that, even in our darkest times, there is always a light. Click on the next video and continue this journey with us. Because, in the end, that is what Lasting Tales offers. Not just stories, but reflections that stay with you, lessons that transform, emotions that remain. And as our closing words, let this phrase be remembered. Here at Lasting Tales, every story leaves marks that time cannot erase. We'll see you in the next one.